I've been working as a seasonal park ranger and maintenance supervisor at a remote state park in northern Maine for over 5 years. The park is beautiful during the summer, filled with tourists, campers, and hikers. But during the late autumn, after the first heavy frost hits and the park officially closes to the public, it becomes a vast, silent graveyard of dead leaves and barren trees. My job during the off-season is to live alone in the main ranger station and conduct weekly security checks on the 12 remote wooden cabins scattered deep within the interior woods. It was a freezing, overcast Tuesday in November. A bitter wind was blowing down from the mountains, bringing with it a light, icy rain that froze the moment it hit the ground. I had spent the entire afternoon checking cabins 1 through 11, ensuring the shutters were barred and the water lines were drained to prevent freezing. By the time I reached cabin 12, the most isolated cabin in the entire park, sitting nearly 3 miles deep into the old-growth forest near the edge of a black, stagnant lake, it was already 4:45 p.m. The winter sun was dropping fast, casting long, skeletal shadows through the dense trees. Cabin 12 was always an unsettling place. It was built in the late 1800s, its dark log walls weathered into a sickly gray color. As I parked my official park truck on the overgrown gravel driveway, I kept the headlights on, letting the bright white beams illuminate the front porch. I stepped out into the biting cold, gripping my heavy iron clipboard and a large ring of master keys. I walked up the creaking wooden steps, unlocked the heavy oak door, and stepped inside. The air inside the cabin was instantly freezing, smelling heavily of dust, old wool, and dry rot. I walked through the small kitchen and living room, shining my heavy flashlight into the dark corners. Everything looked perfectly normal. No signs of forced entry. No wild animals nesting in the furniture. I walked back to the front door, stepped out onto the porch, and locked the door behind me. But as I turned around to walk back to my truck, my heart stopped completely. The headlights of my park truck were still blasting bright white light into the dark woods, and standing directly in the center of the left headlight beam, barely 15 feet away from my bumper, was a woman. She was standing completely still, her back turned to me. She was wearing a tattered, filth-covered white nightgown that was soaked through with the freezing rain. Her long, matted black hair hung down past her shoulders, dripping wet. She didn't have any shoes on, her bare feet pressing directly into the frozen, icy mud. "Miss, are you all right? The park is closed. Do you need help?" I called out, my hand instinctively reaching for the heavy tactical flashlight on my belt. The woman didn't move. She didn't turn around. She just stood there, completely rigid under the blinding glare of the high beams. A heavy, suffocating sense of dread washed over me. The nearest town was over 20 miles away. There were no active campgrounds within miles. How could a woman in a nightgown survive out here in a freezing rainstorm without freezing to death? "Miss, I need you to turn around and talk to me," I said, walking slowly down the porch steps, keeping my distance. Slowly, deliberately, the woman began to turn her body toward me, but she didn't turn around normally. Her head stayed completely still, while her torso and legs twisted around, accompanied by a sickening, wet cracking sound of bones popping out of joint. Crack, snap. When her face finally came into the white light, I let out a choked gasp, stumbling backward onto the porch steps. She didn't have a human face, where her eyes and nose should have been. The skin was completely smooth, pale, and featureless. Just a solid, unbroken layer of gray flesh. But at the bottom of her head, a massive, jagged horizontal tear had been violently ripped open, forming a hollow, toothless mouth that was dripping with dark, viscous fluid. The featureless creature raised its head toward the sky and let out a sound that didn't belong to this world. It was a high-pitched, metallic shriek that sounded like a circular saw tearing through sheets of solid iron. The sound was so loud it made my ears ring and bleed. Screech. Before I could even process the horror, the creature lunged forward, moving with an unnatural, skittering speed, like a massive spider bursting across the ground. I turned around in pure panic, threw my weight against the heavy oak door of cabin 12, unlocked it with trembling hands, burst inside and slammed the door shut, locking the heavy deadbolt, just as something slammed into the outside of the wood with massive, bone-crushing force. Boom! The entire log cabin shuddered. The heavy wooden door groaned, the iron hinges creaking under the intense pressure. I fell back onto the dusty floor, my breath coming in ragged, terrified gasps. Outside, I could hear the terrifying sound of long, sharp claws dragging across the exterior log walls, moving rapidly from the front porch toward the side windows. Scrape, scrape, scrape. I scrambled to my feet, sprinting into the pitch-black bedroom at the back of the cabin. There were no cellular signals out here, and the park truck with my emergency radio was sitting right outside in the driveway. I was entirely trapped. Suddenly, the scratching sound stopped. The silence inside the dark cabin became absolute, save for the sound of my own hammering heartbeat. I stood perfectly still in the center of the dark bedroom, my flashlight turned off so I wouldn't reveal my position. Then I heard a faint, wet sound coming from directly above my head. Drip, drip, drip. A cold, thick drop of liquid hit the center of my forehead. I raised my hand, wiping it away. It felt sticky, viscous, and smelled heavily of iron and rot. With a shaking hand, I raised my flashlight and clicked it on, pointing the beam straight up at the wooden ceiling rafters. The featureless woman was clinging to the ceiling directly above me like an insect, her long, broken limbs wedged into the wooden beams. Her massive, jagged horizontal mouth was wide open, dripping dark fluid onto my face. I let out a blood-curdling scream, throwing myself sideways onto the floor. Just as the creature dropped from the ceiling, its sharp claws tearing through the air where I had been standing a second ago, I scrambled to my feet, bursting out of the bedroom, sprinting through the living room, and threw myself straight through the glass window of the front room, shattering the frame as I tumbled out onto the frozen ground of the porch. I didn't care about the cuts from the glass. I scrambled into the driver's seat of my parked truck, slammed the door shut, jammed the key into the ignition, and threw the vehicle into reverse. I floored the gas pedal, the tires spinning furiously on the gravel as I blasted out of the driveway, reversing down the narrow forest road at 60 miles per hour without looking back. When I reached the main ranger station, I locked myself inside and waited for dawn. The next day, a full team of armed state troopers searched cabin 12. They found the front window shattered, a massive pool of dark, unidentifiable fluid on the bedroom floor, and deep, violent claw marks gouged into the wooden ceiling beams. The creature was never found. I resigned from the Park Service that very week. I will never go back into the deep woods of Maine, because I know that after the frost hits, the forests don't belong to the rangers. They belong to things that hide on the ceilings, waiting for the dark to fall.